Hello and welcome to our special edition of Polotiki, brought to you by News 24. My name is Mahlase. It's day 4 of the ANC's National Elective Conference. It's the morning after the night before. Does the ANC have a new party to launch it towards the 2019 election? That is the big question. Of course, yesterday we saw some really muted reactions to the top 6 that was elected. It was Cyril Ramaphosa, who is now the president of the ANC, but of course his slate did not get key positions. The deputy president position went to David Mabuza, the secretary general's position went to Ace Magashule, and the deputy secretary general is Jesse Duarte, who had the position before and basically retained it. And we know that Magashule and Duarte and also the deputy president, David Mabuza, were on the Nkosazana Dlamini slate. We have told you about the nail-biting race, and at the end, it was 179 votes that separated Cyril Ramaphosa from Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. But there's still lots happening here at the ANC's elective conference here at Nasrec Expo Center. The nominations for the National Executive Committee were done yesterday. An interesting mix. People like Carl Niehaus, controversial Carl Niehaus, making it to nominated for those positions, and the likes of Pravin Gordhan and Mcebisi Jonas also on the list. So the battle continues. The battle for Nasrec continues. We're now joined in studio for the latest by our News 24 reporter, Matsidi Madia. Tsidi, we walked in today, different set of rules, security beefed up. I mean, for me, it took almost 5 minutes. Dogs sniffing my bag, then the security manually going through my bags, which didn't happen in the past 3 days of conference.
Absolutely. We do know that there are concerns. Security was told to be on high alert around the announcement itself, because people worried that there'll be a winner-takes-all attitude. So the assumption would be some would be left incredibly angry, and you never know how they're going to react. In fact, yesterday I was in the plenary, and a journalist said to me, "I'm so scared I might not be able to get out. After these results are announced, we might not be able to get out intact, safe. We don't know if these chairs are going to fly." People were worried about the outcomes. And of course, people have been arrested. I think it's important to also highlight that outside of what we are seeing where we are, there are things happening. There are delegates outside moving in and out of the venue. So from my understanding, police arrested about 6 gentlemen who were with an unlicensed firearm into the lead up into conference. And so there is a security concern, there is a safety concern. And if you recall, I think thinking about Mangaung, when the ANC gathers, the leaders of the country gather here, there's always a threat. If you remember, there was a Puramach threat. It's not surprising that they think maybe we think they're lax and somebody will try to do something that they then pick up as security. So I think that's where that might be coming from.
Yeah, and as I was saying, you know, shocked reporters really as we walked in and we were told that this time around you're not going through the scanners, but instead you're going to have your bags manually searched. And of course, hundreds of reporters are credited, so it's going to be quite a tedious process coming into the Nasrec Expo Center. But then, Tidi, we have to go back to that moment last night. You were inside plenary. I mean, it was a long wait. By 5 o'clock, we expected the result to be announced, and I think at the end it was just somewhere around just before 7 that it actually came through. There was a lot of singing.
Always.
We were judging from the body language, the hugs and kisses that were happening, telling that Ramaphosa had won the presidency. But take us through that moment. What were you seeing inside that plenary?
You know, Matlatsi, in slang terms, when young people speak, it's called a vibe. What was happening in the plenary here at Nasrec was a vibe. But you then again, you're studying people's body language to understand what's going to be coming from there. I'm seeing images of Cyril Ramaphosa crying. But before that moment, actually, I spoke to Matabile Dlamini, and you know, she was confident. Before she went up on stage and saw the long-leaf figure that was Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, and completely understood what was about to happen, she was excited. I walked up to David Mabuza and I said to him, before the results were announced, I said to him, "Congratulations, DP." And he laughed a little and he said, "But it's going to be a tough road ahead." So he didn't deny that he was, of course, the new deputy president, and it was confirmed when the results came out. It was a vibe. But I must tell you, when Cyril Ramaphosa's name came out, you could hear quarters screaming, but I was closest to the northwest in Mpumalanga. deathly silent, completely silent, in absolute shock. Some delegates could not believe that that's what had happened. But of course, the mixed bag, that is the slate, left many people confused. Do you celebrate? Are you upset? What do we do? Some of your people are there. So it was very confusing for people at the end.
And that mixed slate is the key issue here because, you know, Cyril Ramaphosa has the presidency, but when we talk about the engine of Luthuli House, the heart of Luthuli House, the face of Luthuli House, that has gone to Ace Magashule, a very controversial figure. We know that he has been linked to, in terms of the Gupta leaks, he has been linked to the monies that were siphoned off and eventually paying for the Gupta wedding. We know that his sons are linked to the Gupta family.
But beyond that, Ace Magashule comes from a province where his leadership is questioned. He's a lifetime chair. He's been there since 1992, but is referred to as a bully. He had overwhelming support to leave the province, and some people were saying, but the Free State is really confident in its leader. But actually, the reading on the ground was the Free State wants to breathe. It wants to get away from Ace, and are hoping that it becomes a national problem and no longer a Free State problem. So you've got this character who's questionable on so many levels, how he's run his province, and you wonder, how is he going to deal with national level issues? But even the media, us as journalists, Ace Magashule doesn't take well to a lot of my own reports. I do know that I'm constantly called by the ANC in the Free State, unhappy with my work. And my work is not specifically biased to anybody. It's just a fact. But they're angry about the way that they're portrayed. And so the assumption that they can control all of us at a national level is a bit of a joke. So he's going to have a massive wake-up call in adjusting to this new role.
We're going to be talking about that position for Secretary General because we have had developments as far as that is concerned. But we have chosen our picture for the 54th National Elective Conference, and it is by News 24 photographer Felix Dlangamandla, and that is that moment when Cyril Ramaphosa is hugging Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, and we are actually seeing her smile.
For the first time, really. I've been following a campaign and you hardly see a smile on Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma's face. I think it's a wonderful moment. It's very telling of the caliber, really, of those two candidates, you know. A lot has been said about each other, by their supporters, by themselves, but you've got to give it to Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. She was really a graceful loser. Was really gracious. That moment, she went up on stage, clapped hands, went to go hug Cyril. Before the official announcement, she cut a lonely figure. She looked anxious, but not as stressed as everybody else around her. I remember looking at Lindiwe Sisulu, who was a candidate for the deputy presidency, and she even had the earphones on. She was completely removed from the world. But Nkosazana didn't do that. When people came to her and smiled, she would smile. When people came to give her a hug, she would hug, and she'd chat to people. So you give her that. She was really gracious in her loss, as opposed to the ANC Women's League and what we saw much later, who was trying to push for her. They were even angrier than what she appeared to be.
We've heard reports of even the president of the ANC Women's League, Batabile Dlamini, essentially having a meltdown.
I'm not surprised. I bumped into Lindiwe Zuli, the small businesses minister, walking out of the plenary, and I said to her, so how are you feeling about how everything's played out? And she kept saying to me, I don't know. I just don't know. And she just hastily walked off. So I understand that delegation is still upset. You've got people like NC Youth League President Colin Maina saying, we've accepted the results. We will now get behind Cyril Ramaphosa. You saw someone like Pule Mabe, who has been one of the worst critics of Cyril Ramaphosa and the biggest lobbyist for Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, walking up to Cyril and asking for selfies, kind of showing that, look, this is the outcome, it's internal democracy, and we will adjust and we will move with it, and this is our leader. But that, of course, hasn't been coming from our quarters.
Of course, as we were saying, there are developments around that position for Secretary General. But before we get into the latest that we are hearing from supporters of Senzo Mchunu, let's go back to that moment when the elections agency, the independent body that oversaw the process, made the announcement on who has won the heart of Luthuli House.
Comrades, the next position, Secretary General, at spoiled ballots totaling 4 votes and 8 abstentions. And the votes are as follows. Comrade Ace Magashule at 2360 votes. Comrade Senzo Mkunu, 2336 votes.
As you saw in those visuals, Senzo Mkunu, who is the former KZN provincial chairperson, he had gone upstage. We saw him going to the electoral agency just to verify that he actually lost, because it was quite a tight race. He lost by 24 votes to Ace Magashule. But Tidi, this morning we are hearing that Senzo Mkunu supporters are not happy. They are questioning the outcome.
Absolutely, not just Senzo Mkunu supporters, even other provinces like Gauteng, from my understanding, have raised questions about the process and whether or not that final tally is accurate. I did speak to a few people from Senzo's camp this morning saying, we're not willing to comment. Then I said, just give me a yes or no. Is there a question? Should there be scrutiny? Are there discrepancies around these particular numbers? Should ACE be the SG? And the person laughed and said to me, just keep your eye out for developments around the story. This is not the end of it. What you're seeing is not the picture.
Of course, now we are also joined by News 24 resident analyst Melanie Verwoerd. Melanie, we are expecting this to be a big story today. You are also getting the same things that we are getting. The supporters of Senzo Mkunu are saying that Ace Magashule's celebration is short-lived.
Yeah, it's a very interesting, because of course that was the tightest race, and we always were wondering about that one, and it's such an important position. That's the other problem. And what happened was that I spoke to a delegate from the Northwest who was also willing to come on air on one of the radio stations, and who said that in fact they know that there were at least 63, they know the individuals, so it's not like it's just a guess. Now we know there was a discrepancy of 68 votes between who was accredited and who actually voted, and he said they have 63 people that arrived at the ballot box, was accredited, so they had the tags and everything, but their name was not on the voters roll. And usually the two need to coincide, as you know. Whoever's accredited must also be on the voters roll. So what happened, according to him, is that they allowed them to vote, but kept their ballots separately. And he says that they were, when we asked it, they came from, there was a few from Limpopo, he said a few from the Western Cape, but the majority of them came from KZN and was from the Abakalisi region. That they were from there, and that he says that if you count them, that they are more than 24 votes. So if this is in fact true, everything he is saying, then we can know that there is a problem. And we know last night there was this delay, and we know that there was rumors of a recount and so on. We actually thought it was because of the other way around. Yeah. But if this is indeed the case, we might see some problems still today.
How would it usually work, Melanie? I mean, you've covered these and been part of these for quite some time. Usually our understanding is that you would have provincial observers, or every province will have somebody overseeing the counting, and then if there are disputes, they should be raised then. I mean, is it not too late in the game for any dispute to be raised? Well,
I mean, that's going to be the interesting question. Exactly how did it happen over there, and who decided that they... Now, the Electoral Commission has the ultimate say in this, because it is, well, even though it's an ANC body and there still seems to be confusion amongst the public, it's not the country's IEC. It is the ANC's I know too many acronyms, but it's the ANC's Electoral Commission, but they ultimately have the final say, not the NEC and so on. But so we need to ask what exactly happened there. Is the story correct? Did they keep ballots separately? And if it is, sure, and if it was indeed the case that the numbers were, could have swung it, one has to question the wisdom of then announcing it, whether they shouldn't have then just stepped back and said, let's just pause this one, give ourselves some breathing space. Now we know it got very hot on the floor. We know the tension started rising. We know that delegates started getting a little bit what's going on here. And we knew they had to control that. But maybe it would have been wiser, if the story is correct, to just have held back on that position and say, look, comrades, there's still a problem around this one.
Absolutely. My thinking is, how do you then go ahead and do, because it's Steve Harvey, how do you then go ahead and say, we made a mistake, sorry Ace, you're not the SG, Senzo is. How do you undo that when somebody's now officially already in the position, has started making plans to find a replacement? This is the chairperson of the Free State, you need somebody to replace him there. He's probably started doing talks about who must come in next, so that's been kicked off there. How do you then go, no, sorry, go back to the Free State? And
especially in the case where they've tried so hard to keep things out of the courts, by doing everything so correctly. And to add to that, this is Ace, Ace, and you couldn't, apart from the top position, nothing was more controversial than that position, So why, and also given that it's the Free State, given that it's courts, given that they are the ones who's already in court, they should have been, if they should have held back. Clever.
They should have done this, dealt with it a lot more better.
We'll go deeper into this when we also joined later on by our other resident analyst, Mpumelelo Mkhabela. But ladies, I've got you here. We have to talk about the biggest loss, the women. The regression. We had a top 6, at least Baleka Mbete was the chairperson. We had DSG Jesse Duarte. Historic moment for the first time in the ANC. A woman presidential candidate, she loses, but the top 6, only one woman.
It's so sad, excuse me. It's so sad, that it feels to me that we're just regressing, that we are further off than we were in 1994, where gender was on the top of everybody's agenda, where they made so clear that everything was balanced always. And it just seems that we're regressing. We must also remember that there's not a single female premier in the ANC.
No chairperson.
Or chairperson. And so you have to ask, what is going on here? So the only woman now that's in the top position is in fact, is a deputy SG, it's really, really troubling that this is happening. I think we need to discuss why it's happening. Apart from just normal patriarchy and so on. But and hopefully, if we do see a change in cabinet, and we do see Cyril Ramaphosa taking over as president of the country soon, that he can correct that in terms of at least making sure now that cabinet, and frankly, he should make more than 50% now.
Definitely, I'm there with you. Yeah.
You know what I think the problem is? I think the ANC Women's League needs to look internally, needs to look at itself. What's that age old saying? Do not put all your eggs in one basket? That's exactly what they did. They put all their faith in the #1 position, saying they'll have the most powerful position. We do give them credit, because for the first time in the ANC's history, there is a woman who made it onto the ballots. That is historical. However, they forgot about everything else. They completely forgot about everything else. And I've been listening to the criticism against the ANC Women's League from women saying, but that's not a women's league. That structure is useless. It doesn't know what its role is. So as far as I'm concerned, from where I'm sitting, the ANC Women's League needs to have a lot of introspection. It needs to look at why it exists and what's the purpose of it, and then try and chart a way forward. For the most part, it's done what the ANC Youth League does now. It is a tool, it is a henchman, it is a toy soldier itself. It needs to reassess where it's going. It has failed women on so many levels.
And strangely enough, Angie Motshekga's words came back to me. Remember when we asked her the question, is the ANC ready for a woman president? And she kept saying, we're not. I actually think that we must start far back. We must start looking at provincial, we must start actually starting with mayors. We must then look at becoming provincial chairperson and grow it there.
You need to infiltrate the system, absolutely.
But that's true. That's true. If you look at it, I lived for a long time in Ireland. And in Ireland, they really struggled with women. It was less than 6% at the stage when I was there in Parliament. And yes, they had to start thinking very much, but they want to bring them in from mayoral levels because they didn't have them. This is the ANC. This is the party that said in 1994, 30% quota. It's not that they are short on women, and there are enough in local government moving up, etc. I agree that the Women's League has been part of the problem to a large extent. Not only, you know, exactly the things that you've been saying, but also the way that they protected Jacob Zuma, because you got an anti-Zuma feeling. Now she's already got a bit of a problem that she's too closely aligned with him. And then you get the Women's League, who had consistently, in a very destructive way at times, for women, had then been protecting him, you know, and really actually even attacking other women. And I think then the other problem, of course, is that there's some questions around the leadership and, you know, particularly Batabile Dlamini and her role that she's played in the SASSA crisis, that also, even within the ANC, I think women are the main beneficiaries of the SASSA grants, and so on. You also then go, sure, we don't, you know, there's a bit of a conflict.
You have a league that's not carrying the women's agenda at all.
Yeah.
The only thing that they have to tell is that we are also female, and that's where it kind of stops. That's never good enough.
Never good enough. You know, we are continuing with getting reactions from different quarters to this historic moment for the ANC. Cyril Ramaphosa is the president, but his faction or his slate did not win all of the key positions. Our News 24 journalist Tidi Madia spoke to the SACP's first Deputy Secretary General, Solima Paila, for his reaction. Let's take a listen.
There's a mixed bag, a lot of mixed reactions towards the top 6. But joining us now for reaction is the SACP. I'm speaking to its first Deputy General Secretary, Solima Paila. Thank you so much for joining me. Just very quickly, the SACP's views on that mixed bag that's left a lot of people feeling confused.
Firstly, is to congratulate President Cyril Ramaphosa for his election, as well as the other 5 officials for their election as well. And we hope that they will handle our movement with care and sensitivity, with integrity, with discipline, with accountability, without corruption. And we have no doubt to him and the leadership that they will make our movement proud.
Corruption is such a tricky word when it comes to the ANC, especially when you look at that particular top 6. And then you have people like Ace Magashule who have been implicated in the Gupta emails. What do we do with that, with people like that as part of the leadership who are already implicated in what is really concerning, which is state capture? And that's something that the SACP has been so outspoken about.
We have called on all those implicated in the emails to be investigated so that appropriate action is taken. We can't have the leadership that is tainted with corruption or that flirts with corruption, and that is why it's important. It doesn't matter what position you hold, whether you are an ANC official or not. Corruption must be addressed, and we need leadership that is very clean and therefore committed to clean government. Because if the leaders are themselves implicated in these kind of things, corruption and so forth, it will be impossible for them to enforce clean governments to those who are in government, which must account to them to run their affairs properly.
But looking at the SG position, I'm going to kind of go back to the Ace Magashule factor. Looking at the SG position, the engine of the ANC, what does that say to us about the ANC's delegates when they put somebody who's implicated in that position to run the movement?
Well, that also calls for a deeper renewal of the ANC itself at the branch level, because Ace didn't elect himself. He was elected by delegates. It means that there must be a systemic outreach program, political education program, into the ANC branches so that they understand their own responsibilities, their own value system, and therefore they can always elect. But in any case, he was eligible for election. That means there was nothing wrong with that. So in that case, therefore, we want to congratulate him.
3 of the top 6 are from provincial leadership. They now take on a greater role, a national role with more responsibilities. What's the advice that the SACP has for them? I mean, they're leaving behind provincial politics. What's the advice at dealing with the national side of things as far as the movement is concerned?
Well, the main thing for them to know is that at the national level, there's too much scrutiny of individuals. So therefore, we need people of integrity, of uptightness, who will not do wrong things, who will try by all means to make sure that they are within policy and framework of our movement, because they are now setting a national example. That's what is largely different. But otherwise, these are cadres of the movement. The policies have not changed. They remain the same.
My final question to you, the former SG, Gwede Mantashe, in his organizational report, spoke about the near collapse of the movement. The SACP now going forward, what needs to be done? You know, you come to the table with wanting a reconfiguration of the alliance. Some people aren't keen to budge. There are even some people in the top 6 who've made utterances about if the SACP wants to go, it must actually just go. What's the way forward towards funding each other?
Well, there won't be, the revolution can't accept that kind of arrogance from any sector of our movement, be it from the SACP or from ANC or COSATU or any leaders of our movement. What is important is that we need to reconfigure the alliance so that it can function appropriately according to the current conditions and be useful, so that we don't have a situation where President Zuma refused us to meet for more than a year, and he has the guts to come here and blame us for challenges when actually for speaking out when he refused us to meet. When you have such a possibility, that means the alliance is not functioning. The alliance is needed. Its main intention is to sort out major problems facing our society, the inequality between men and women in what we call the gender program, the inequality between the classes, between the rich and the poor, as well as inequality among races, between races in South Africa. We still need to build a united South Africa, and all other social challenges, be it education, health, and others. And the SACP has led by example and championed all of these social programs through campaigns that we have run over the years.
That there, of course, was the first Deputy General Secretary of the South African Communist Party, Solima Paila, speaking there to News 24 journalist CD Madia. And now we are welcoming on studio Mpumelelo Mkabela, one of our other News 24 resident analysts. Mpumi, before you came on, we were talking about the huge loss in terms of women on the top 6. Devastating.
Very devastating. I mean, for me, it shows that the women have not been able to have a proper political strategy to entrench themselves in the ANC. They have not been able to utilize the advantage of the 50-50 policy, which is fairly new. I mean, it was adopted during Thabo Mbeki's second term, if I'm not mistaken, that women should be 50-50 equally represented with men in all structures, in government as well as in the ANC. So the environment for them to operate from a policy point of view, from a women-oriented environment has been created. So they can't complain that, you know, there's even a quota, for example, but still they're not able to utilize that conducive framework. And I think for me, it's more a question of political strategy on the side of the women than it is a question of patriarchy for the men. I mean, the women are the majority in this country, population-wise, and I assume they're increasingly becoming a majority in the ANC. So they can't keep on complaining. The victimhood among the women must stop. They must realize that they are in charge. They have the ability and they have the capability. They must just sort out their political strategy. Part of that political strategy has to do with divisions among the women movement. They are so divided and so splintered. And men often exploit that thing and appropriate them. So a man will appropriate the woman and say, well, I'm in favor of women. That's why I'm pushing this candidate. The question is, why can't women themselves consolidate their positions and decide their future? Why should they wait for men to deal with that kind of stuff?
I can see Melanie there raring to come in, but you know, this issue is getting a lot of traction. People are responding to it, and we've been receiving a lot of tweets around this issue, a lot of anger. And you know, one is from Ferrell Hafiji, who's the editor-at-large at Huffington Post, and she's saying 1 woman in ANC top 6 and in a deputy's role, of course referring to the Deputy Secretary General. And she says, when the big boys fight, women's empowerment is the first casualty. This is not nga, she says. And of course, I mean, Melanie, you wanted to come in there.
Look, I mean, I agree that, you know, women have to get their act together. That is true. And often women are really bad at empowering women. I agree with that. But the ANC, and you're right that the actual formal policy of 50-50 is quite new, but the ANC's policies go way back. I mean, way, way back. And remember the big fights. You'll remember that, Mahlatse, the big fights that was there before 1994, and how the ANC women, and not just the Women's League, the women in the ANC, because of not all women are part of the Women's League in the ANC, but how they asserted themselves. Remember Freni Chingwala, how she was part of that, and so many other women, to say, listen, we need at least 30%. So it started off with 30%. But we're not even close to 30% here. No. You know, we're 1/6, and actually if you count the top, you know, it's actually less than that because it's a deputy position.
You know, one of the things I remember was Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngakula, and she had said that they had gone to Polokwane, and at Polokwane, she had pushed that because the two men were fighting, Jacob Zuma and Thabo Mbeki, let's put forward a third way. And she told us that when they arrived at Polokwane, some of the women that had agreed with her then pulled out. That debate was then lost. And then, but they had met again, and one of the agreements they had reached is that the next time we're putting forward a woman, we must be united behind that woman. But clearly that did not happen. Let's just go back to some of the Twitter messages that we're getting on this particular issue. This one is from Fanam Kamshengu. Women emancipation in the ANC is pure lip service. Sadly, it is women in the ANC who work against each other. We continue to blame the women for their own problems. Okay, the way ANC has incredible women though, wow. And Jessie Duarte is not even at the top of the list. I'm sad for them. And you know, the messages continue. This one is from Matuba Mahlaji, and he is quoting from Tokyo Sehwale, who said, we should be ashamed we only have one woman in the ANC top 6. Those messages are continuing. It says, will the Women's League recover from the huge loss? This is from Sophie Mukwena, the acting politics editor at the SABC, and she says, delegates at the ANC elective conference will today vote for the NEC members and continue with discussions on policy documents. Will the Women's League recover from the huge loss? So those were some of the comments from Twitter. But also we have some breaking news here on Polotiki. And if you're wondering why I'm holding my phone, it's just to make sure that we give it to you as we are getting it. And it is around the issue of the Secretary General. News 24 can confirm that the ANC NEC, the ANC is meeting over 68 missing votes. News 24 has confirmed that a meeting of the ANC steering committee for this conference is actually underway to probe, in inverted commas, the disappearance of those 68 votes. Just to contextualize it for you. So 4,776 voting delegates were accredited and the credentials were actually adopted, but only 4,708 delegates actually voted. So now, what the issue is that they want the election agency who conducted the elections on behalf of the ANC's Electoral Commission to explain what happened to those missing votes. As we've reported when Tidi was here earlier, is that we have been getting messages from those who supported Senzo Mchunu saying that there has to be a probe. This is an issue that we must watch. It will actually develop. And people are saying that Ace Mahashule's win might actually be short-lived. Mpumi, any chances that it could be overturned at this point?
Well, there is a possibility. I mean, it doesn't mean that because the results were announced at plenary, you know, they would remain cast in stone, even when there's evidence that the results were inaccurate. So when inaccuracy is found, we have no option but to correct it. You can't say we found inaccuracy, but sorry, we've already announced. You can't do that. So there will be, if it's proven, if the auditing happens and the recount happens and it's found that indeed the 68 votes were missing in the calculation, and in fact the part of them, or more than just over 20, how much does he need? I think he needs about just 15 or 20.
Votes,
yeah. So if he gets about 20 out of the 60, then he wins.
Well, in fact, he only needs 13.
He only needs 13. Yeah. So if it's found that out of the 68 votes that they failed to count, and those votes were his, votes, then he takes off. But it doesn't necessarily follow that those 68 were his. Maybe all of them were Mahashule's votes. So that's another thing that needs to be verified. Although given the nominations and how the nominations went, it's highly probable that the majority of the 68 actually belongs to Senzo Mchunu.
And if, in fact, the person that I spoke to was correct, that it is from the Abakulusi region.
Yeah.
Okay, I keep thinking, I wrote it down incorrectly. I've got it now. Yeah. Abakulusi. That it is from that region. I think that is a strong Senzo Mchunu region. So then I think we can, if he is correct about that, then it sounds like there might be a big problem. The question is, will it be accepted? I mean, can you just overturn it? Or do you actually have to revote it? And will people accept it? Because we saw, and I think there were some of the scenes that you just ran there, you know, how joyful people reacted and how intense people reacted to Ace Magashule's win. I mean, he is a very controversial and very divisive figure in the ANC, but also the passions behind him run very deeply. So this could now be the first really big glitch that we see in terms of this conference.
And I'm sure Cyril Ramaphosa is watching this quite closely. I still say that he needs the SG's office. He needs to have somebody that he trusts and can work with in that office.
He does. That's why I think if it is found that the votes were counted incorrectly and they are adjusted and Senzo Mchunu wins, I don't think there will be much of a fuss, quite frankly. I think given how the whole top 6 went, it was expected that Senzo Mchunu would win. So there will be reactions in the Zuma camp, but given the fact that Cyril has already claimed the bigger prize, more people will more likely shift towards being allegiant to him.
I hope so. The only problem is that if, again, this person that we spoke to is correct, that it actually has to do something with the credentials as well. Now we're back to the credentials problem, you know, and that's always a bigger problem because now it's a question where the tax, how did that not happen? Is there any more problems, you know? So I really hope that is true, but I'm sure, and the leadership will have to talk very hard and passionately with Ace, and particularly that he should accept it. And we must remember the stakes are very high for Ace Magashule because his premiership runs out at the end of 2019 elections. You know, so this was always why this was such a high stake
and
for
the
him.
province wants him out.
And also he's got a problem in his province. I mean, there was a lovely irony here that the man who's twice now come to conference with an invalid PEC, as well as who's just had 2 court cases against him for branches which were not properly constituted and run, that he's going to be in charge of running the branches. But the problem is, so the only way you can deal with Ace that's not got a position anymore in 2019 is by promising something in cabinet. And how, if there's already such a question in our own minds about whether he can be SG, at least he was going to stay in the ANC, can you put him in government?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, Mpumi, you know, we saw that glum face of President Jacob Zuma when Cyril Ramaphosa was announced as the president. He was probably saying, I didn't get the presidency, but I've got the Secretary General. Any comfort for him?
You know, the only time I saw, the first time I saw Zuma nearly in that mode was back in 2005 after he had just been fired by Thabo Mbeki as deputy president, and he called his press conference there in Tennis, and he looked totally devastated. It's what I saw yesterday comes close to that, although he was much more devastated then than now, but it's almost close. I mean, when the man is almost in tears, he's crying deep down. But I think it's also, for me, a demonstration of the limitation of his political strategy. He has been praised of being a tactician, maneuvering and all of that. He's been good at self-serving politics, politics of self-interest, politics of maneuver, survival, personal survival. But I don't think he's good at the long-range game. He looks, for now, he survives. He can beat you in the politics of the now. But in the long term, he has failed. But for example, he failed to understand that Mandela could not get his way in terms of his successor. He failed. Mandela failed. He wanted Cyril and he couldn't get it. Thabo Mbeki, we know, didn't want to be succeeded by Zuma. What happened? Mbeki failed. Now Zuma tries to do what 2 powerful men before him tried and failed, and he thinks he can succeed. And of course he failed. So it's, I think, in my opinion, a lesson that a sitting president, towards the end of your term, people are already tired of you. Even if you don't have scandal, people are kind of like...
They're ready to see the back of you.
They want to say something new. So the moment you position yourself as something new, like Cyril tried to do, to position himself as something new, even though he was actually a deputy to Zuma. But he positioned himself as somebody who presents a different trajectory for the party. And people wanted that. So Nkosazana was seen as somebody who will just continue with Zuma's legacy. People don't want that. At some point, people want change.
I want us to move on to the other big loser from this conference, KwaZulu-Natal. I mean, we were counting that it's probably the first time in our times that you don't have anybody from KwaZulu-Natal in the top 6. Of course, if Nkosazana Zuma, Dlamini Zuma had won, she would be there, and then if Nathi Mthethwa had won, he would also had been there. Do you agree that this is devastating for them as a province? I mean, the biggest in the ANC.
Yeah, because if you actually look, the other big provinces are represented there, Eastern Cape, Limpopo, and Mpumalanga, of course. So they're all there, but the biggest province in the ANC is not now represented in the top 6. And one has to ask whether that would in fact calm some of the violence down in KZN that we've been seeing, or might it actually increase it? Now, of course, if the position of SG is overturned and Senzo Mchunu comes back in, then of course KZN is represented.
But it's the other faction of the KZN.
Exactly.
It's
so
not
we're back at the divisional thing.
Yeah.
So the question is, you know, I mean, KZN is always complicated, and it's now in particularly very complicated and very painful thing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what I'm wondering is the ANC vote in KZN, because we have seen the increase of the ANC in KZN go up because of President Jacob Zuma's presidency and how it grew traction, that whole tagline of 100% Zulu boy. And that is how KZN then became the biggest province of the ANC, and they seemed, and then they regained control of the province in terms of voter support. And we know KZN is, I think it provides the second biggest in terms of electoral, in terms of votes for the ANC.
It's quite ironic that the rise of Zuma was a boon for ANC membership in KZN, but it's the same rise of Zuma that has led to the downfall of KZN in this conference. If you look, go back a little bit, it was Zuma who instigated that the conference of KwaZulu-Natal, the elective conference, should happen earlier than planned. He advocated for that at the NEC, even when other people were saying no. And he pushed for that because by that time, they had already decided that because Senzo Mchunu was elected against Zuma's own preference, Zuma had preferred Willis in the previous conference. This one must happen early so that we can get rid of Mchunu. So and then getting rid of Mchunu, then they will be able to launch an early presidential campaign. And that, for me, was the source of the divisions in KZN. What we are seeing now is actually repercussions of what Zuma himself was involved in the beginning in KwaZulu-Natal.
You know, we are continuing with our live coverage of the ANC's 54th National Elective Conference. It's the morning after the night before, because another battle is continuing of the NEC. But I just want to remind you of our top story, our breaking story for today, a dispute being lodged against the Secretary General position, where Senzo Mchunu supporters are wondering what happened to 68 votes. As we remember last night, we saw Senzo Mchunu going upstage, expecting that actually he was going to be announced the winner, but it didn't happen. Let's go back to that moment.
Comrades, the next position.
Thank you very much.
Yes, cool.
Secretary General. At spoiled ballots totaling 4 votes and 8 abstentions. And the votes are as follows. Comrade Ace Mahashule at 2360 votes. Comrade Senzo Mchunu, 2336 votes.
Of course, there we were watching a repeat of last night, what is becoming the big top story of this National Elective Conference, hearing that Senzo Mkunu's supporters have lodged a complaint with the ANC Steering Committee for this elective conference. The issue is that he lost by 24 votes to Ace Makashule, but his supporters are asking what happened to 68 other votes. To get reaction on this and all other things that have happened in the past 24 hours, we're now joined in our studio by the Northwest ANC Chair, Supra Mahumapelu. You promised you'll be back. Thank you for coming back. Before I talk to you about the 700 votes, I mean, we have heard these stories of the complaint being lodged. Are you aware of it?
I'm very much aware. I mean, it started yesterday that some people are not happy with the outcome in as far as the Secretary General's positions are concerned. If you have a dispute in the ANC, there's a particular process that you have to follow to lodge your dispute. I'm told it has now gone to the steering committee. Remember, every province has got a representation in the steering committee, so we'll know what is going on there. But I don't think it will enter the steering committee. If indeed there is a complaint about that particular matter, it will have to come to plenary.
So what would be your reaction if it comes to plenary?
Our reaction is a very simple one. We have a responsibility to safeguard the integrity of the African National Congress. There are certain things you have to accept to live with in the ANC, even if you are not happy or you are uncomfortable with certain positions. Like ourselves, we have appealed to the decision about the Bojanala delegates, right? Which meant that we could have insisted that they vote and maybe you put them in a separate ballot. We could have done that. It's allowed in terms of law. But to the benefit of who? It's not going to help anybody because there's going to be a cloud over the results of the ANC when we are parochially just looking at the situation of one region. That's why we said, let's leave this particular matter. I hope comrades can think very carefully about this particular matter and how it will affect the movement, because all provinces had representation in the leagues in the county, and they were at liberty to recount and recount in the manner in which they wanted. Why didn't they do that? We'll ask that question in plenary. But also, you can't ask for a recounting of one position.
Why not? I mean, if the dispute is with one position, why shouldn't you?
No, if there are people who may have voted and they were not supposed to vote, how do you know that they only voted for one position? Because there are 6 positions, all the names are in the ballot. That's why I'm saying they're opening up the organization for something that will be unfortunate, because there will be delegates who will call for the entire voting process to be started afresh.
As in, let's go vote again?
You start afresh from president up to the last position, because you can't target one position. You don't know who voted how.
Mpumi, obviously this day-to-day...
So that's going to be our position as the province. If you want a recount for one position, question will be, why not for all the positions? Because you don't know where these people voted and who they voted for.
Well, for me, I mean, the way the chairman is explaining is that actually the ANC has got 3 options. One is to go the technical route. What are the rules of the ANC saying when there's a dispute? You go clinically on that, because this is a position that's been disputed. You follow those rules, you recount. If there's a recount, you restate the correct one. Maybe somebody read there incorrectly. Maybe it was a question of reading. Who knows? They must verify that. That's a clinical route. You follow the legal process strictly. The second one is really a political solution. To say, well, guys, given the fact that this thing has already been announced, there's expectations, the top 6 looks fairly balanced from both sides, why don't we just leave it for the sake of the organization, which is more the political solution. Then the third one is the chaotic solution. In fact, which is not a chaotic solution. It embroils the entire organization into disrepute, because what we are saying is that you go to plenary, you say to the other comrades, if you insist on this thing, we want a recount on all of them, or even a revoting of all of them. That's throwing the conference completely in chaos. So that's a chaotic approach. So they need to find out which approach of the 3. Do you go the clinical route? Do you go the political solution route? Or do you go the anarchist route? Which one will save the ANC?
If you had to choose between all 3, which one would it be?
We must engage ourselves and live with all the deficiencies that may have been there. I'm not saying there are deficiencies, But in the organization, we must always put the interests of the organization first. I mean, you can't have an election of a top 6. The whole world that knows that there's now been announced. And then you start complaining about things that you can resolve quietly behind the scenes, because the image of the ANC is at stake here. And what affects the ANC affects the country. So we have to think beyond our own immediate emotions and think about the country, think about the movement, because if you don't do that, the ANC will collapse.
I mean, for me, this seems like, you know, every single day the ANC has to step in to save this conference. I mean, from day one, we couldn't have credentials adopted. Then there was the intervention from the chairpersons with Supra leading that. And then day 2, it was the voting process, you know, issues around that. And then eventually credentials adopted, people get to vote. Now there's another need to save this conference.
Actually, the fact that the conference happened is a massive achievement for the ANC. I mean, even they themselves are beating themselves in the chest to say, look, you guys said this conference would collapse. In fact, it's not as they themselves were not sure whether it won't collapse, but they worked towards it not collapsing. And they have a good reason to celebrate that it didn't. So what he is saying now is fearing that this dispute might actually take us back to the possibility of the conference collapsing when the conference is almost coming to an end. Is it worth it? So he seems to be veering on the political side, which is the second option. And for him to get to the second option, he must threaten the third option,
Which is the
anarchist one.
You wanted to respond to that?
You see, let me start in Parliament. What happened in Parliament, right? We have got some information on who voted how during the motion of no confidence on the president. The critical question was, do you want to take that route of dealing with those particular individuals at the expense of the organization, or must you take a mediated political solution? And we opted for that position. So I think that we'll have to do that here. I myself, as the provincial chair, I'm going to speak to some of these comrades who are from other provinces to say, what is at stake here is the ANC, it is the country, it's not who you wanted to see in whatever position in the officials, and let's put the interest of the organization first. And I can assure you now, I'm going to address delegates when I leave here. If comrades are going to insist on this position that they're coming up with, we're going to ask for the entire process of voting to start afresh.
Well, that's a story we will continue to watch, and hopefully they will allow us in for that very heated discussion as we are expecting it to be. But Supra, you are here for a reason.
Yes.
You were sitting here and said to me, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is winning this by 700 votes. You lost.
Yes, we were wrong. We were wrong. But that was based on the work that we have done. You know what it demonstrates? It demonstrates that delegates of the African National Congress can think independently. And that's strengthening of democracy within the organization. That even if you have discussions among yourself and so on, and there is an agreement, they believe strongly that they can still individually express their view. And for me, that's victory for ANC democracy.
You saw the stunned reaction.
And I humble myself that we said we'll win with 700 votes and so on. Now we must move on. Nkosazana, we spoke to her yesterday, accept the results. We spoke to Comrade Cyril. We must now work with you, support you as our new president and the collective of the NEC officials. From there, go and work towards 2019 victory.
What was her reaction, though? I mean, how was she when you
She has accepted the results very well. Remember that she actually said this before the conference. We met her before, including Comrade Cyril. We met him before. And she has accepted the outcome. She asked us to speak to the delegates to accept the outcome and live with the outcome and embrace the ANC democracy.
Let's talk about that top 6, though, and still on Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma's issue.
Yeah.
Regression for women. I mean, we are back to not even, I mean, we now only have 1 woman in that top 6. That is really not a good sign in terms of what the ANC preaches about women empowerment.
Not only that, the National Democratic Revolution says we must build a non-sexist society. This is a great regression of unprecedented proportions in the African National Congress. And I think we must go and sit down and say, how do we address this particular matter going forward? Of course, this is an outcome of a democratic process, But you can't have a democratic process that is an antithesis of what we are struggling for. It means patriarchy is still finding its foot within the African National Congress. It means we are finding it difficult to outroot patriarchy within the ANC. And I must say, it's a sad day that we only have one woman. I'm not saying it should have been Nkosazana. Even if it was Lindwe Sisulu, it would have been okay. At least have 2 women or 3 women in the officials. And I think we must discuss that and say, going forward, how do we correct it?
The issue is that people are saying that you have to be starting even at provisionals. No, provincial level, where you are chairs. I mean, it's a boys' club there.
Yes, that's true.
You know, and why is it that women are not emerging at that
If you read
level?
my speech when I became chair for the first time, I propagated for us looking for women to serve in the officials. And I said, even if it means me, I must not be elected as a chairperson in future. That must happen. But at least in our province, we had Edna Molewa as the provincial chairperson of the ANC for 2 terms, and so on. So the other provinces have to come on board. They can't just keep on electing men all the time.
Before we get to let you go, I have to ask you, the opposition parties have already started criticizing this top 6.
Yeah.
And the positions that they're looking at are the ones from your slate. I know you'll find me with that one. But, you know, the Secretary General, Ace Magashule, embattled as he is currently, is somebody who's been implicated in the state capture allegations. We know the money that left the province offshore coming back to pay for the Gupta wedding. You've got Jesu Duarte also linked to there. And then obviously Ace Magashule's sons also working for the Gupta family.
Well, the opposition will not congratulate the ANC in particular, comrades like Comrade Ace Magashule and so on. We are a democratic state, right? There are processes in motion to deal with allegations related to the so-called state capture, right? Now, let us await those processes to unfold. And if people are found guilty along the way, irrespective of who they are,
and the positions they hold,
it doesn't matter. We will then have to deal with that particular matter when we come to it.
Well, thank you very much. That was the chair of the ANC in the Northwest, Supra Mahumapelo. He came back humble, accepting that they didn't win this by 700 votes. But of course, you are talking about the breaking news that we have on News 24, where we're saying that the steering committee of the ANC's 54th National Elective Conference is now looking into a matter where Senzo Mkunu's supporters are saying that we should have received 68 more votes, or they are asking what happened to the 68 votes. Let me read through some of those comments. This one from Kosi, and he says, those votes rob Senzo Mkunu. Then we've got another one from Captain Swing, 43, Gupta Gate strikes again. Ubaba Enemy Kizobantu says, I smell a Gupta. Luzuko Gazi, my first thoughts exactly seeing Magashule win with such margins that they tampered with the results. Mpumi, this is definitely quite a key issue.
Yeah, but how it gets resolved, it's going to be very, very difficult one. You know, we saw earlier in plenary how people in plenary challenge every small thing. Yeah. You remember there was a big issue at plenary about how to go about electing the additional member. I mean, people were raising every minute issue. So, I mean, given that kind of context, I would expect that it's going to be an issue that will be fought hard from all sides. So, resolving it will actually determine whether the ANC can be at peace after this conference.
Of course, we are continuing with that breaking news story. You are giving us your comments, reacting to this issue. And now we've got Sifiso Kazulu saying, let there be a recount to make sure that nothing bad happens after the conference. Then we've got Reynard who says they went to the Shibini, referring to those 68 missing votes. And then Abu Day says, Zuma stole them, I swear. Eldpool says it's Magashule again, of course referring to all of those court judgments ahead of this National Elective Conference. The battle now is within the NEC.
Yeah. Well, we are continuing the democratic process. I don't see it as a battle. It's an opportunity for members of the ANC to elect a collective in the National Executive Committee. I hope it can be balanced. Also,
balanced in what way?
Women, firstly. We must prioritize women in the list of the additional. Secondly, we must make sure that there is continuity. You don't wipe off everybody who was in the former NEC. Thirdly, elect people who will be able to do groundwork. They can speak nice English on TV and so on, but when they're supposed to go do work on the ground, dololo, you can't have such NEC members. So that's what we'll have to do, hard workers, and elect people who are humble. Even when they are right on something or correct, they must still humble themselves before the masses of our people. So I hope we can do that.
Mpumi, of course, we're running out of time, but how important is the NEC for President Cyril Ramaphosa?
It's a very important NEC for him to actually govern effectively and not to have decisions or his interpretation of ANC policies being outmaneuvered, blocked and all of that. He will need an NEC that's very supportive of him. That plays a role of support, but also advisor. That's what the ANC rules say. The NEC advises and actually cancels the president. He takes a mandate from them at every interval or every other period of the processes of the organization. So if he has an NEC that doesn't support him, an NEC that is splintered, well, this conference might as well not have happened, because we saw during President Jacob Zuma's time, the ANC couldn't take certain decisions that were critical for the organization to move forward, because the NEC was, in the main, supportive of things that were wrong that the president was doing. They couldn't find a mechanism to get out of it, given the fact that they were splintered, but he had 50+1. So the president now must get 50+1 for right reasons, to do the right thing, not to purge people. First of all, he must extend a hand with the people that he defeated, and there should be no camp. That's the only way you can start remaking the ANC.
Unfortunately, we've ran out of time, but as we are reporting, the battle for Nasrec continues. It's the issue of the Secretary General. How will it be resolved? That is the big question. But of course, who becomes members of the National Executive Committee, which is the committee that is most powerful in between conferences. That has been our special edition of POLOTIKI. We are continuing with our live coverage, so please don't go away from News 24, and we will update you on that breaking story. My name is Mahlatse Mahlase.